Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Sonika Garcia,
And I'm Brad Davidson, and this is Breaking the Code,
a podcast series focused on debunking the myths about behavioral science and arming our listeners with the information they need to make sense of behavioral science and give them information to help them apply it to their work as marketers.
So today we're going to go in a slightly different order. I'm going to tee up a few interesting questions for Sonika about the idea of social prescribing. The title of today's podcast is Social Prescribing as a Reaction to Social Disruption. I think we are drawing the conclusion ourselves that social prescribing, which feels fairly new to both of us, is in fact a reaction to a growing crisis of isolation or loneliness. Certainly, there's been a lot in the press recently about all of that, and it's something that we looked into fairly recently. So it's might be new here, but it's not new in the rest of the world. But what is very interesting, Sonika, is we've known for years and years that loneliness literally kills. It has a physiological effect. It has a psychological effect. We know prisoners of war, just plain old prisoners who are isolated, suffer tremendously. We know that children who are raised in isolation without touch are profoundly damaged sometimes by this lack of interaction. We've known that loneliness kills, frankly. And it's interesting that in this country, we just started sort of thinking through that equation and going, well, if it kills, it must be a disease. And if it's a disease, it should have a medical solution. So I think I'll stop right there and I'll throw it over to you. Talk to us a little bit about, what we mean by social prescribing. Why is it in the news? And what do we think of it as a pair of social scientists?
Yeah. I think what you said was interesting because this is definitely gaining some popularity in for a variety of reasons that we'll get into. But I think a lot of people talk about like this loneliness epidemic and social isolation in the realm or the context of like post-COVID. And I just want to set the precedent and the understanding that everything that we're going to be talking about today kind of started way before COVID. This has been an issue that people have been facing and been faced with for like decades and honestly, probably even longer. So I just want to say that I think COVID and social isolation from, quarantining and all that has made it worse, but it definitely was always kind of headed in that direction in this country. So with that being said, the two sort of news items that come to mind for me that are pretty recent. So one, Harvard just released, I think they call it the happiness study. It's the longest longevity study. It spanned over 85 years where they followed people for 85 years to basically understand like what makes someone happy. What is the key to happiness? So literally following people their entire lives. And is it money? Is it a fulfilling career? Is it, family? What is it? And ultimately the answer was social relationships, or what the study calls like social fitness. It's not about physical fitness, it's about social fitness. And really what that was all about is the health of your relationship, not the quantity. So, you could be surrounded by a bunch of family and friends, but actually the health of the connection that you have with people, which I think is not I can't say I was totally surprised reading it, but it was just very like reassuring, like, wow, this is the longest study and that is the ultimate finding. It wasn't even close. Like that was
It is interesting, isn't it, that like we do these, the biggest study ever, or the longest
yeah.
study ever to prove what we kind of already knew, and then we give it a name for that we haven't heard before, but it's basically means like friends help you live longer, but we call it social fitness now, which
Yeah.
is, I have to say, something that we as social scientists have to own this. We do manage to take things that are fairly straightforward and make them sound very alien, but social fitness is like a classic example of like friends help you live
Yeah,
longer, right?
I
So
know.
people who matter.
Right.
But
When I
anyway,
have
yeah, it
plans
is
now, I'm going to say I'm just working on my social fitness.
right, exactly. Like fit that into a sentence
Sure.
easily. So yeah,
Yeah.
so that was a really interesting study. It was, and one of the things that a lot of people around me picked up was that it's not money, right?
Hmm.
And people say it all the time, but this is actually proof. Like there is a certain point beyond which money doesn't make you any happier, and there does seem to be a sort of reverse return on investment. I've never talked to a billionaire. I have no idea how happy they are, but when you get above the hunt, depending on where you live, right? $100,000 in Milwaukee is a little different than in New York, but depending on where you live, being upper middle class is about as high as you want to get if you want to stay happy, which I found really interesting. But
Right.
again,
Right.
I don't know if that has to do with isolation because the higher up you go, the fewer peers you seem to have as well. Who knows?
Yeah, and I think, well, and then that goes back to what I was saying too. Like the study actually outlines, again, yes, it's not about just the relationships that you have, but it also talked a little bit about like like I think they said like your relationships are like living beings. So like you have to constantly revisit your relationships and evaluate like and there's even like a table. I would really urge everyone to check out the study because it's interesting. There's a whole table on like how you can go relationship by relationship and you check off these boxes to see like, okay, does it fulfill me in like comfort? Does it fulfill me in, intimacy, empathy? Like there's all these like sort of measures. So anyways, I thought that was interesting. And then the second is more recent. So I think that study came out like later last year, maybe January of this year. But more recently, the Surgeon General of this country, of the U.S., came out and officially declared loneliness as an epidemic. So pretty in line with the Harvard study, making this sort of announcement a couple months after that was released, but basically saying that like it affects all humans, all Americans. It should be considered a health concern as serious as obesity and smoking. I think it was like equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day if you're battling loneliness, which is very significant. So that in and of itself. And then again, I didn't read through the whole report, but there is a huge long appendix in the back of things on a policy level, on a community level that we should be doing to alleviate the feelings of loneliness in our communities. And you had brought up social prescribing, Brad. So I'll tie it back to that and we work in health, so tying in health and social relationships and what can we do, being behavior change experts within a health sector. So many of the recommendations were really focused on what can healthcare professionals and our health care system in this country do to create programs that connect people. And that's
Yeah.
really the concept of social prescribing. It's relying on our healthcare professionals and the healthcare sector as a whole to create programs, create opportunities, guide people in the direction of, sure, medicine and, health in that sense, but also the social fitness, if you will. So,
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. So yeah, I think the article that we both sort of like used an article as our reference point. The Surgeon General's comments, I think, came Monday, but the article came out Tuesday in the Washington Post that you and I looked at. And, we've since gone on and looked at it a lot. What's really interesting to me is Surgeon General statements are really policy statements, right? The guy doesn't have much of a practice anymore. I don't know how many patients
right.
he sees, but his statement is really about setting the agenda for where we need to be going. And to me, is sort of a bit of a historian of medicine. I don't want to claim a field that I never got a degree in, but going back 50, 100 years, something like that, doctors did suggest things to people like join a knitting club. They've kind of stopped partly because they don't know their patients as well as they used to. We've
Mm,
talked about this before, but people don't have those sort of long-term embedded relationships with their clinicians that they used to.
right.
So it's hard for me to prescribe to you, Sanika Garcia, something that would be meaningful because I don't know you, so I
Mm,
can't tell you what to do. The other thing though was you don't get paid for it, right? For the same reason you mentioned smoking. So 15 cigarettes a day for those of you who are not reformed smokers like me, that's nearly a pack a day, which is a lot, right? Pack of cigarettes has 20 cigarettes. 15 a day is absolutely enough to make a big dent in your health and longevity. And so, something that you can measure to that degree, now you think about interventions for it. Now you start thinking, well, how can we address that? We need to think of ways of compensating doctors for that because they don't really counsel patients to quit smoking either because you can't bill for it and it takes a lot of time and it also kind of doesn't work. So most interventions to quit smoking have a pretty bad success rate, I would say.
mhm.
Loneliness seems, I don't know if it's the same kind of thing. It's a metaphor, right? Loneliness as a disease is a metaphor. The impacts of loneliness we can measure, but you can't do a PET scan on loneliness and go, you're a 9 on the lonely scale. And when you start talking about things like you can go through workbooks to see how your relationships are, it sounds a whole lot like the marriage counseling industry, which again is all about what's the fitness of for many people, for most of us, you and me, right, the most important relationship in your life is your spouse. And so, this is just an extension of that, but it's also a medicalization of it, that you've got the Surgeon General going, we know gun violence is important. We know drugs are important. We know drinking is important. We know sedentarism is important. We know diet is important. You can go down the list, right, of things that are really driving mortality and morbidity in the United States. And he's put a pin in the ground and gone, or in the map, I guess, stake in the ground, pin in the map, saying it's loneliness. Like, this is where I'm going to start going after. And I think it's really telling
Yeah.
that we've come to the point, to your point, maybe pandemic sort of brought it into stark relief, but we've come to the point that we're willing to address medically what we've known socially for literally decades. So,
I
it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, no, no, no. I mean, yes, everything that you're saying. I also wonder, so something that you said that like, yes, we can't definitively or maybe objectively, I should say, measure loneliness the way that we can with other health conditions. But I wonder, but is there a way like that we can medicalize measuring loneliness of a patient, whether it's like a questionnaire, like I mean, I know we have questionnaires about like pain, and I know there's postpartum questionnaires. If you're a new mom and you take your kid to the pediatrician, your baby, you fill out a questionnaire every time that's supposed to gauge your level of like, postpartum depression if you
Really?
have it, or mental well-being. Yeah. And so like, what if there was something like that was routine at like a PCP visit or something?
Yeah, I mean, look, that we're getting into solutions, which I
Yeah.
think, we can discuss those pretty much infinitely, but just to sort of do it quickly, there already are questionnaires that when I go in to my primary care physician, who happens to be a nurse practitioner, and I chose her specifically because I knew she wasn't going to
Mhm.
go somewhere and I could have a long-term relationship with her. There is a questionnaire that I get
Oh.
about depression and sleep and all this stuff. I don't think she's looked at it more than once. We just talk. But
Well,
but
is there questions about your relationships?
no, there is not that, but there is a social fitness questionnaire. But what's interesting is, not social fitness, sorry, depression questionnaire. But
Yeah.
what's interesting to me is, our kids, two of our kids were born in California. Think of the place as very progressive, but they didn't actually have a postpartum depression questionnaire they were using with my wife at the time.
Hmm.
So I'd like to think there was an evolution there that they are doing it. But I think the recognition of loneliness as something that doctors should occupy themselves with was part of a doctor's remit,
Hmm.
became less part of a doctor's remit. And we've talked about this, that as we get better and better technologically, we
Hmm.
become less and less connected emotionally, physically, humanly to our doctors.
Right.
So it's more like going to a Jiffy Lube or something where, they're really good at working on the car part, but they're not so good at working on the person part.
Yeah.
I'm really excited that they've taken this on. Now you mentioned something called social prescribing. We're a little behind the curve compared to some other places. Talk a little about how some of the other countries that we've looked at in Europe and around the world are addressing loneliness, because we're not the only country.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And this kind of, it serves as inspiration. And to your point, we could talk about solutions all day long. I think these examples, I mean, there's so many, but a few that really stuck out to me. So in Edmonton, Canada, I mean, obviously we know Canada is super cold. It's cold in New Jersey too. But like there's seasonal depression disorder, seasonal affective disorder, where you pretty much have like, seasonal depression. And I know I fall into that sometimes when it's cold and you haven't been outside and you can't, get in like nature, fresh air, see people. So they had these like certain parks, like certain big parks and communities. They had heated, like big heated areas, whether they were enclosed or completely outdoors. So you could actually go and take your kids to the park or go to the park to meet up with friends, go for a walk, and it was a heated environment, so you felt comfortable being outside, which I thought was so cool and so simple. And
That
I
prescribing, or is that just social engineering or social, construction of some sort, right? That they've
well
sort of civic construction.
I think that I think they're all related. And this is what I'll say it. There needs to be like those opportunities in the community. So social prescribing is just your doctor or healthcare professional, whoever you see, whether it be a therapist, a nurse, like a physician. they're able to connect you with these resources in the community. If they don't exist in the first place, then social prescribing can't really happen. So essentially, I'm sure not everyone living in the communities within Edmonton are maybe aware of these programs, but ultimately, their doctors are able to inform them about it. Whether it's you need to get exercise for a medical reason, whether it's, hey, I kind of sense that you're dealing with some sort of seasonal depression, and the doctor is able to let them know about these programs. Same thing with in Iceland, not related again specifically to I mean, it is related to social prescribing, but it's a community effort. So they give children activity cards. So it's kind of like almost like a debit card with money on it, and every family gets a certain amount. And you can use those activity cards to participate in extracurricular activity that, maybe, you don't have to worry about part of the cost. And I
Right.
think that that's also really simple. And that's, depending on the needs of certain communities. But again, if a doctor can tell you, hey, there's this, league that your kid can join, or there's this, camp or whatever it may be. But if you don't have the resources and the money to send your child to these programs, and there's social prescribing going out the door, like they're all connected. There needs to be the opportunity, and then there needs to be the healthcare professional that can tie and connect people to them. And what I will also say is something that I've been thinking about as I've been reading these articles and hearing about these examples, and just thinking about like the loneliness epidemic as a whole. So taking it back to our role, right? We work as strategists, communication experts, behavioral scientists within healthcare marketing, and a lot of our remit falls on, from standpoint of our clients. What can we do to equip doctors with tools to better serve their patients? Like that is the work that we do. So I wonder, taking all this information in from like an application standpoint, my hypothesis is that we currently really focus on the individual. We really focus on what can we tell doctors to say to people, or what sort of programs can we implement for the consumer to change behavior, take part in a healthier lifestyle. But so much of that falls on the individual. I don't think that we do enough in the sense of like social fitness and social connection. Like how can we better suggest to our clients, and then eventually, our HCPs and our patients, to engage in more like social solutions? Is that a
Yeah.
fair hypothesis?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, when we first started discussing this episode, I did bring up, patient autonomy as one of the barriers to social prescribing,
Right.
conceptually. So I'll get into that for a sec. But, I think before I do, I want to talk a little bit more about like why doctors should care about social prescribing and things like that. Uh,
Mm,
Stabilizing your lipids, or improving your asthma, your migraine, whatever it is, those are all, well, actually, they're not all symptomatic, right? Those are the measurable outcomes of good doctoring. There's
right.
no question of that, right? But happy patients, satisfied patients, patients who will live a long, healthy life, that is also the outcome of good doctoring. And I will remind people that Maimonides, for whom Maimonides Hospital is named, right, the famous medieval medical philosopher, but he's up there with Hippocrates, right? A lot of medical schools use his oath and stuff. He has the line very early on in his oath, the oath of Maimonides. It says, "May I never see in the patient anything but a fellow creature in pain." Now, this is often seen as a call to empathy. It's also often seen as a call to like, don't commercialize things too much. At least that's how it's get used now. Like, don't look at them as a wallet. Look at them as a fellow human in pain. Don't look at them as a ruptured spleen. Look at them as a fellow human with a ruptured spleen, right? Those
Yeah.
sorts of things. But I think, when you talk about loneliness, that's pain. And
Yeah.
I think that's the part of doctoring that has always been more philosophical, more sort of what they used to call the priestly functions of medicine, sort of touching hands as someone, as you let them know that like there is no cure for what they've got and things like that. That is the part of medicine I think that has really fallen away. And it's not just doctoring where it's fallen away. I think it's fallen away in large swaths of society. And one of the main critiques of this culture when people move here from places with much more embedded sort of social networks is that it's a lonely place here, that America values autonomy and individuality. And we embed that into things like medical practice, where it is entirely legal for me to be diagnosed with something terrible and tell no one in my family,
Right.
so that no one knows. That is what patient autonomy is all about. It's I am allowed to make decisions on my own behalf as as an individual with desires that are mine. And
Yeah.
so it would be unethical if we went into the office and the doctor looked straight at my wife and went, "What do you want to do?" Except they do it all the time in things like oncology, and they have to sort of pre-clear that, like, is this okay with you? And they might sort of throw, my wife out of the office and say, "Okay, now I got to ask you on your own." But for the most part, we really stick, with the exception of spouses and parents, we really stick to this notion of autonomy. And it seems weird that you can proudly sort of die alone as a result of that. And we
Yeah.
don't have a good framework for to your point, reaching out to people's social networks. When we lived in smaller communities, when we all knew each other, it was very easy for a doctor to go, "How come I'm not seeing you at the pub?" Or, "How come, I've heard from Mary that you don't show up to the sewing circle anymore. What's going on?" Right? I know
Right.
that's kind of a
No, but
dated
yeah,
sort of
that's how
reference,
it
but you see what
was.
I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like,
Yeah. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
you are now just you
Yep.
floating through this sort of electronically mediated world, and it has had an impact on how people feel. Your neighbors aren't necessarily the people you're close to. In fact, some of the people I talk to the most are really, really far away because I've got the internet and my friends have sort of moved on. And so it's challenging. I think we're all struggling with an emerging society that is based on the individual and individual rights and individual needs and individual achievements. But what makes us happy is individuals embedded within meaningful relationships.
Hmm.
And there would be nowhere better to start this discussion, I think, than medicine and medical school. What is your job as a doctor? What is your obligation to this fellow creature in pain? To make sure that when you send them out the office, they're not just getting a handful of drugs, but they're actually getting something that will make them want to take those drugs
Yeah.
properly, not all at once, right?
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. No, I think and I think it's we're never going to get to the place that we were in the past where, doctors were so embedded in communities that you knew everyone and you could have those conversations at the local convenience store, whatever it may be. Like, we're not going to get there, but I do think we can exist in a world where individual autonomy is still respected and is still, there, but giving the opportunity again with the individual making that final decision. No one is forcing you to engage in a group or a fitness class or, go to a park to meet up with, whatever, people with similar interests. No one is forcing you to do that. That's still your decision. But we don't even give people the opportunity and the knowledge of, okay, well, where can you go if you are interested in seeking that
Right.
out? And
Could you
that's where we need.
prescribe,
Yes.
could you prescribe going to mass, or something like
Yeah,
that? I mean, again, if you know
exactly.
someone's religious and it's something that they used to do, certainly there are vehicles for knowing that, right? So when we
Exactly.
moved from quality of life questions to activities of daily living, it was
Hmm.
specifically because people are very flexible and they can adjust to a very, very small life, and they often do. But when you say, okay, look, according to the chart, you used to walk with your friends 3 times a week. When was the last time you did that? 4 months ago. Okay, what's wrong, right? That charting of activities of daily living to me would be the in to
Yeah.
charting, your social fitness, as opposed to just like everything good at home, to which the answer is typically sure.
Yeah.
You move on.
Exactly. I
Good, because I
guess.
got eight
Yeah.
minutes and I got a full waiting room. Thank you for the answer. So,
Right.
again, I don't want to, I don't want to go too far down the philosophical road, but I do think we have come to an inflection point where the some of the loneliest people in hospitals are the doctors themselves, and I
Yeah.
think that's a problem too. And I think social prescribing for patients implies that it's a patient problem. It's an everyone problem. I think we're
Oh,
alienated at
100%.
work. I
Yep.
think we're alienated at home. I think we're alienated at school. I do think COVID had a huge disruptive impact. But to your point, the the ingredients were all there and the pot was already cooking. So
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Brad. I think this all just came out. I'm sure that over the course of this year, next year, at least in the next 5 years, this is gonna, rightly so, gain some attention that it deserves. And hopefully on a policy level, we will be able to see more programs that exist to connect people. And I think as healthcare marketers, what we should be thinking about is, okay, well, there's no question that loneliness is a problem. It's literally been now announced as an epidemic. So
right.
given that, what can we do in we're think tanks, we're solution oriented. That's what we do in our jobs. And so how can we take this knowledge and the importance of social connection and find ways to apply it to behavior change interventions and solutions? Like, this is just another way to get people to change behavior. If you connect people, it will
Yeah.
help them make better
Well,
health
look,
decisions.
absolutely. And look, like we produce a lot of imagery, right? So,
Yeah.
thinking about, you and I do a lot of semiotic analyses,
Yeah.
visual interpretation, sort of the meaning of things and visuals. And we show a lot of people embedded in very happy families. We don't actually tell them how to do it. We just go, if you take this asthma drug, this cancer drug, this, depression drug, this eczema drug, whatever it is, right? Very often we will show people at birthday parties or on the beach with their family or hiking with their family or at a picnic. I pretty much hit the big four, right? But maybe weddings, right? Like, so there we go, the big five. But some kind of social event. We do show people alone sometimes, but a lot of times we show them embedded in a family, but we don't actually tell them how to do that. We just assume they have it, right? So it is interesting, like the role that family and relationships play in the images that we produce for these ads. It sort of assumes that you've got that, or that that's what you're trying to get back
Exactly.
to. And if you
Yeah.
don't have it, I'm not so sure what you can do about it. But we certainly know that showing people in a successful, happy way requires you showing the relationships. We knew that, but we haven't really taken on what do we do about it. So I think
Yeah.
it's an open question.
You're getting my wheels turning. This might have to be another episode. But don't you think that we also show a lot of people just by themselves? Like, we talk about that too. Like, it's just the person, like, looking into
We
the
do,
camera and
yeah, the
not,
sort of
we don't
staring at
show
the
the
camera.
relationships. Yeah,
Yeah,
always. So I think, we should like think about doing a semiotic analysis on how like relationships are shown in healthcare, like just
sure.
in general.
Let's
I think
do
that
it.
would be really cool, especially now because what we consume is what we believe, and so it's all related. I think
Right. But I don't
that's
think we could do a
interesting.
podcast on that because
No.
we'd have to describe all the images. So,
Right,
look, I,
unfortunately.
I hope everyone is feeling connected and happy. And, I'm glad that the Surgeon General has put this stake in the ground. They don't do things on their own. It's not like he woke up in the morning and went, I'm going to talk about this. So I
Yeah.
think this really just is a recognition that a lot of what's going on, sure, we can fix it medically. But man, if we don't fix it socially, there's no point. Like, drugs don't work in patients who don't take them because they just don't care whether or not they live or die. And that's an extreme case of loneliness. But I'm just saying it does matter for people's health, wellness, longevity, productivity, just personal satisfaction and joy, which I think all of us as marketers should be trying to increase the joy quotient in the world. It is part of our remit. So I'll,
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
Thanks, Brad. And thanks everyone for tuning in. So until next time, I'm Sonika
I'm
Garcia.
and I'm Brad Davidson, and this is Breaking the Code.
Bye.
Bye.
Breaking the Code is a podcast by Havas Health and U's Medical Anthropology Department. Created and produced by Brad Davidson and Sonika Garcia. Content editing done by Catherine Rossi. Post-production audio editing done by Gabriel Allen Cummings. And inspiration by all of you. Thanks for listening and your continued support. If you enjoy these episodes, we would love to hear from you. Please leave a rating and subscribe. Until next time.